Sarah Martinez wiped down the same coffee cup for the third time, her weathered hands moving with practiced precision. The small airport cafe buzzed with the usual morning crowd of flight instructors, maintenance crew, and weekend pilots grabbing their caffeine fix before taking to the skies. At 62, Sarah had been working this job for nearly 8 years, and most people saw exactly what they expected to see: a quiet, gray-haired woman who made excellent coffee and kept to herself. The pilots who frequented the cafe treated her with polite indifference. They'd order their drinks, discuss their flight plans, and complain about weather conditions, never imagining that the woman behind the counter understood every technical detail they mentioned. Sarah had learned to nod and smile, keeping her extensive knowledge of aviation hidden beneath a carefully constructed facade of simplicity. "Morning, Sarah," called out Jake Thompson, a cocky flight instructor in his 30s who considered himself the hotshot of Riverside Municipal Airport. "The usual, please. And make sure the coffee's strong today. Got a challenging student coming in who thinks he knows everything about flying." Sarah poured his coffee without comment, adding the 2 sugars he preferred. Jake had been coming here for 3 years, and like everyone else, he'd never bothered to ask about her background. She was just the coffee lady, invisible in the way that service workers often become to those they serve. The morning crowd included Maria Santos, a commercial pilot who flew cargo runs between regional airports. Maria was one of the few people who treated Sarah with genuine warmth, always asking about her weekend and sharing stories about her flights. Even Maria, however, had no idea that Sarah's knowledge of aviation far exceeded her own. As Sarah cleaned the espresso machine, she listened to a heated discussion between 2 pilots about emergency landing procedures. One insisted that a particular maneuver was impossible in certain aircraft, while the other argued otherwise. Sarah could have settled the debate instantly, having performed that exact maneuver under combat conditions in 3 different fighter jets. Instead, she continued her work silently, letting them argue about theories while she held the reality of experience. The cafe's location on the 2nd floor of the terminal building provided a perfect view of the airfield. Sarah often found herself watching planes take off and land, her trained eye automatically assessing wind conditions, approach angles, and pilot technique. She noticed things others missed: the slight hesitation in a Cessna's approach that suggested a nervous student pilot, the textbook precision of a corporate jet's landing that spoke of thousands of flight hours. Around 10 in the morning, Dr. Emily Chen arrived for her weekly flying lesson. Emily was a pediatric surgeon who decided to learn to fly as a stress reliever from her demanding hospital schedule. She was methodical and careful, exactly the kind of student pilot Sarah would have enjoyed instructing if anyone had known about her qualifications. "Sarah, I'm so nervous about today's lesson," Emily confided, ordering her usual green tea. "We're practicing crosswind landings, and I just can't seem to get the hang of it. Jake says it's all about feeling the plane, but I need to understand the mechanics of what's happening." Sarah handed over the tea with a sympathetic smile. "I'm sure you'll figure it out, dear. You seem like a very careful person." What Sarah didn't say was that crosswind landings had once been second nature to her, executed in weather conditions that would ground most civilian aircraft. She'd landed F-16s in desert sandstorms and brought damaged fighters home in winds that would terrify most pilots. The techniques Emily was struggling with had saved Sarah's life more times than she could count. The airport's atmosphere changed around noon when word spread that a military transport was making an unscheduled stop. These visits weren't uncommon at Riverside Municipal, which served as an alternate landing site for various government aircraft. Sarah watched from her window as the massive C-130 Hercules touched down, its 4 turboprop engines creating a distinctive sound that brought back a flood of memories. She'd flown countless missions in similar aircraft, though her specialty had been fighters. The sight of military personnel deplaning brought a familiar tightness to her chest, a mixture of pride and loss that she'd learned to manage over the years. Her military career felt like another lifetime, belonging to a different person than the quiet woman who now made coffee for civilian pilots. Young Lieutenant Marcus Webb entered the cafe with 2 other crew members, their flight suits crisp and bearing the patches of the 89th Military Airlift Wing. They ordered coffee and sandwiches, speaking in the clipped, professional tones that Sarah remembered well. Lieutenant Webb couldn't have been older than 25, probably fresh from advanced flight training. "This is a nice little airport," he commented to his companions. "Good runway length, decent facilities. Wouldn't mind being stationed somewhere like this after my tour." Sarah served them efficiently, noting the pride in their bearing and the easy confidence that came with military aviation training. She'd once carried herself the same way, before life had taught her that confidence must sometimes be hidden to survive in a world that wasn't always ready to accept what it saw. The afternoon brought its usual lull, giving Sarah time to think about her evening plans. She lived alone in a small apartment 10 minutes from the airport, where model aircraft filled every available shelf, and her walls were covered with aviation photographs that she told her landlord were just pretty pictures. The photographs actually documented a career that spanned 24 years and 3 major conflicts, but she learned to downplay their significance. As closing time approached, Sarah began her end-of-day routine, wiping down tables and preparing to register for counting. Tomorrow would bring the same familiar faces, the same polite interactions, and the same carefully maintained invisibility. She'd perfected the art of hiding in plain sight, allowing people to see exactly what they expected while keeping her true self safely protected. The secret she carried wasn't just about her past accomplishments, though those were considerable. It was about the knowledge that lived in her hands, the split-second decision-making ability that had been honed in life-or-death situations, and the technical expertise that could solve problems most pilots couldn't even imagine. Sarah had learned to find peace in her quiet life, but she sometimes wondered what would happen if circumstances ever forced her to reveal who she really was. Outside her window, the last flights of the day were departing, their navigation lights blinking against the darkening sky. Sarah watched them go, remembering what it felt like to be up there, masters of speed and altitude, responsible for million-dollar aircraft, and often for lives that depended on her skill. Those days were behind her now, stored away like treasures in a locked box. But sometimes on clear evenings like this one, she could almost feel the stick in her hands and hear the whisper of wind over wings. Sarah's alarm clock buzzed at 5:30, the same time it had every morning for 8 years. She'd maintained military precision in her personal schedule, though no one at the cafe knew this habit stemmed from decades of pre-dawn briefings and sunrise missions. Her apartment was sparse but organized, with everything in its designated place. The aviation magazines stacked on her coffee table were the only hint that her interest in flying extended beyond serving coffee to pilots. In her bedroom closet, hidden behind winter coats, sat a locked metal box containing medals, flight logs, and photographs that told the real story of Colonel Sarah Martinez, retired United States Air Force. Among the decorations were 3 distinguished flying crosses, 2 air medals with oak leaf clusters, and a Purple Heart earned when her F-16 took ground fire over enemy territory. The woman who now worried about running out of sugar packets had once been one of the most decorated female fighter pilots in Air Force history. Her journey to this small airport cafe had begun with a childhood fascination with flight. Growing up in a working-class family in Texas, Sarah had spent countless hours watching jets from nearby military bases streak across the sky. Her parents, both factory workers, couldn't understand their daughter's obsession with aircraft, but they supported her dream of joining the Air Force. Sarah had excelled in school, particularly in mathematics and physics, skills that would later prove crucial in understanding the complex calculations required for fighter operations. The path hadn't been easy. When Sarah entered the Air Force Academy in the early 1980s, women were just beginning to be accepted into pilot training programs. She faced skepticism from instructors who doubted her physical and mental toughness, and hostility from male cadets who resented her presence. Sarah responded by outperforming most of her classmates, graduating third in her class, and earning the respect of even her harshest critics. Fighter pilot training had been the ultimate test. The F F-16 Fighting Falcon was a demanding aircraft that required lightning-fast reflexes and absolute precision. Sarah mastered its systems with an intensity that impressed her instructors, learning to think at supersonic speeds and make split-second decisions that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. She earned her wings at a time when female fighter pilots were still rare enough to draw media attention, something she'd always found uncomfortable. Her first combat deployment came during the Gulf War, where she flew 67 missions over enemy territory. It was there that Sarah earned her reputation for precision under pressure, developing tactics that would later be incorporated into Air Force training manuals. She could threat a fighter through anti-aircraft fire with mathematical precision, deliver ordnance on target despite weather and enemy action, and bring damaged aircraft home when other pilots might have ejected. The skills she developed weren't limited to combat. Sarah had also served as a test pilot, evaluating new aircraft systems and procedures. She'd been part of the team that tested early GPS navigation systems in fighter aircraft, work that contributed to the precision-guided warfare capabilities that modern pilots took for granted. Her technical reports, written in the clear, concise style that characterized military documentation, had influenced aircraft design and pilot training protocols. Between combat tours, Sarah had served as an instructor at the Air Force Weapons School, the elite program known as Top Gun for Air Force pilots. She taught hundreds of pilots the advanced techniques needed for air-to-air combat, surface attack missions, and electronic warfare. Her students had gone on to successful careers throughout the Air Force, many eventually becoming squadron commanders and wing commanders themselves. None of them knew their former instructor now served coffee to weekend pilots at a small municipal airport. The transition to civilian life had been challenging. After 24 years of military service, Sarah found herself struggling to adapt to a world where her expertise wasn't valued or even recognized. The skills that had made her an exceptional fighter pilot didn't translate easily to civilian employment. Airlines in the 1990s were still reluctant to hire female pilots, especially those with only military experience. Corporate flying positions went to pilots with extensive civilian backgrounds and connections Sarah didn't possess. More difficult than the job search was the loss of identity. For over 2 decades, Sarah had been Colonel Martinez, respected leader and accomplished aviator. Suddenly, she was just another middle-aged veteran competing for positions with younger pilots who had civilian flight training, but none of her combat experience. The adjustment period had been marked by depression and a sense of purposelessness that took years to overcome. The cafe job had started as temporary employment, while Sarah figured out her next move. She'd answered a help-wanted ad at the airport, thinking that being around aviation might help her transition back to flying. The owner, Mrs. Patterson, was a kind woman who didn't ask probing questions about Sarah's background. She provided steady work, decent pay, and the anonymity Sarah had come to value. Over the years, Sarah had watched hundreds of pilots come and go. She'd observed student pilots struggling with concepts she could explain in minutes, witnessed experienced pilots making dangerous mistakes that her training would have prevented, and listened to countless discussions about flying techniques that she'd mastered decades ago. The hardest part wasn't the work itself, but maintaining the pretense of ignorance when she possessed knowledge that could help or even save lives. There had been moments when Sarah almost revealed herself. When a young pilot was struggling with instrument flying in bad weather, she'd wanted to share the techniques she'd learned flying night missions over hostile territory. When instructors debated the best approach for teaching emergency procedures, she'd bitten her tongue to prevent herself from describing real-world emergencies she'd survived. The discipline required to remain silent about her expertise was perhaps greater than any challenge she'd faced in the cockpit. Sarah had also witnessed the generational changes in aviation. Modern pilots relied heavily on GPS and automated systems that didn't exist during her flying career. While she appreciated the safety benefits of new technology, she sometimes worried that pilots were becoming too dependent on electronic aids. Her generation had learned to fly by feel, to read weather conditions from cloud formations, and to navigate using landmarks and radio beacons. These skills were becoming extinct, replaced by computer systems that could fail at critical moments. The irony of her situation wasn't lost on Sarah. She possessed knowledge that could benefit every pilot who entered the cafe, experience that could prevent accidents and save lives. Yet she remained silent, serving coffee to people who saw her as invisible. It was a choice born of necessity rather than preference, a survival strategy developed after years of being dismissed or patronized when she revealed her background. In quiet moments, Sarah sometimes wondered if she'd made the right decision in retreating from aviation. She could have continued fighting for recognition, could have started her own flight training business, or found ways to share her expertise. Instead, she'd chosen the safety of anonymity, trading her professional identity for peace and stability. It was a bargain that had its benefits, but also its costs. As Tuesday morning approached, Sarah prepared for another day of serving coffee and maintaining her carefully constructed facade. She had no way of knowing that this particular day would test every skill she'd learned in the cockpit, and that the quiet life she'd built was about to be shattered by circumstances beyond her control. Tuesday morning began like any other at Riverside Municipal Airport. Sarah arrived at 6 o'clock to open the cafe, starting the coffee machines and arranging pastries with her usual efficiency. The weather was overcast with low clouds, the kind of conditions that would keep most recreational pilots on the ground. Professional aviators would still fly, but they'd need to rely heavily on instrument navigation rather than visual reference points. Dr. Emily Chun appeared earlier than usual, looking nervous as she ordered her green tea. Her scheduled lesson with Jake Thompson wasn't until 9, but she wanted extra time to review procedures for instrument flying. Sarah noticed Emily's tension and offered her a supportive smile, remembering her own early struggles with flying in limited visibility conditions. "I hate flying when I can't see the ground," Emily confided, stirring her tea absently. "Jake keeps telling me to trust the instruments, but it feels so unnatural. How do pilots learn to ignore what their body is telling them and believe what the gauges show?" Sarah poured her own coffee, considering her response carefully. She'd flown countless missions in weather far worse than today's conditions, learning to trust instruments even when vertigo made her inner ear insist the aircraft was in a completely different attitude. The techniques for overcoming spatial disorientation had been drilled into her through years of training, but she couldn't share that knowledge without revealing her background. "I suppose it takes practice," Sarah said diplomatically. "Like learning to drive at night. You have to trust your headlights instead of trying to see everything yourself." The morning progressed normally until around 10:30, when the airport's emergency radio crackled to life with an urgent transmission. Sarah, who'd learned to monitor aviation frequencies during her military service, immediately recognized the controlled panic in the pilot's voice. "Riverside Tower, this is November 7-4 Golf Bravo, declaring an emergency. We have complete electrical failure and are flying VFR in IMC conditions. Request immediate assistance for emergency landing." Tower Control responded professionally, but Sarah could hear the concern in the controller's voice. An aircraft flying under visual flight rules in instrument meteorological conditions was one of aviation's most dangerous scenarios. Without electrical power, the pilot would have no radio navigation, no transponder, and no instrument lighting. In the current weather conditions, with cloud ceiling at only 800 feet, it was a potentially fatal situation. Jake Thompson, who'd been reviewing lesson plans at a corner table, looked up with interest. "Sounds like someone's having a bad day," he commented casually, not fully grasping the severity of the situation. Sarah moved closer to the radio, her pulse quickening as she heard more details. The aircraft was a Piper Cherokee carrying 4 passengers, including 2 children, and was approximately 20 miles northeast of the airport. The pilot reported that his alternator had failed, draining the battery completely. He was flying on backup instruments only, with no navigation equipment and limited visibility. "Tower, November 7-4 Golf Bravo. I'm a private pilot with only about 200 hours total time. I've never done an emergency landing like this. My passengers are getting scared, and I'm not sure I can find the airport in these conditions. The admission sent a chill through Sarah. A low-time pilot in an electrical emergency, flying in clouds with no navigation equipment and frightened passengers on board, was facing a situation that could quickly turn deadly. She'd seen experienced military pilots struggle with similar emergencies under better conditions. Tower Control was doing everything possible to help. They'd activated emergency services and were trying to vector the aircraft toward the airport using radar, but the pilot's transponder was dead, making tracking difficult. The controller was relying on the pilot's own navigation and position reports, which weren't reliable given the circumstances. All aircraft, this is Riverside Tower. We have an emergency in progress. Clear the pattern immediately and monitor this frequency for updates. Sarah watched through the cafe window as other aircraft began departing the area, leaving the airspace clear for the emergency. She could see emergency vehicles positioning themselves near the runway, their lights flashing ominously in the gray morning light. Maria Santos, the cargo pilot, had arrived for a late breakfast and was listening to the radio traffic with obvious concern. "That poor pilot," she said to Sarah. "Electrical failures are scary enough in good weather, but in these clouds, he's essentially flying blind." She'd seen it happen to both student pilots and experienced aviators who found themselves in conditions beyond their training. Dr. Emily Chun had been listening to the emergency unfold, her face pale with worry. "Sarah, that sounds terrifying. Can they really help him find the airport without any navigation equipment?" "I hope so," Sarah replied, though privately she was becoming increasingly concerned. The standard procedure would be for Tower Control to vector the aircraft using radar, but that required a functioning transponder. Without it, the controller was essentially guessing at the aircraft's position based on the pilot's own navigation, which was clearly compromised. Jake Thompson joined the conversation, his earlier casual demeanor replaced by professional concern. "This is why I always tell my students to stay proficient in instrument flying, even if they only plan to fly VFR. Weather can change quickly, and electrical systems can fail without warning." The emergency was now entering its 15th minute, and Sarah could hear the increasing desperation in the pilot's voice. "Tower, my passengers are really scared. One of the kids is crying, and I don't know how much longer I can keep them calm. I need to get on the ground soon." Sarah moved to the window, scanning the overcast sky as if she might spot the distressed aircraft. Her military training had taught her to think systematically about emergency procedures, considering all available options and resources. The pilot needed guidance that went beyond what Tower Control could provide through radio instructions. He needed someone who understood the specific challenges of flying without electrical systems in poor weather conditions. The radio crackled again with another transmission from the emergency aircraft. "Tower, I think my fuel is getting low. I've been flying for over an hour, and I'm not sure how much I have left. What should I do?" The situation was becoming critical. A low-time pilot with navigation difficulties, frightened passengers, poor weather conditions, and now fuel concerns was facing multiple emergency factors that could quickly compound into a fatal accident. Sarah felt her chest tighten as her military instincts activated, analyzing the problem and considering solutions. She knew techniques for dead-reckoning navigation that could help the pilot find the airport. She understood the psychological aspects of managing panic in emergency situations, both for pilots and passengers. Most importantly, she had experience talking pilots through crisis situations from her years as an instructor at the weapons school. But revealing this knowledge would mean exposing the secret she'd protected for 8 years. Sarah faced a moment of decision that would determine not only the fate of the aircraft in distress, but also the carefully constructed new life she'd built for herself. Sarah stood frozen at the cafe window, listening to the increasingly desperate radio transmissions. The pilot's voice had taken on the edge that she recognized from her military experience, the sound of someone approaching panic while trying to maintain professional composure. In the cockpit of a single-engine aircraft with frightened passengers and failing systems, panic could be fatal. "Tower, November 7-4 Golf Bravo. I'm really struggling here. I think I might be in a spiral, but I'm not sure. The attitude indicator isn't working, and I can't tell which way is up. The admission sent ice through Sarah's veins. A spiral dive in instrument conditions was one of the classic killer scenarios in aviation. Without visual reference to the horizon or functioning instruments, pilots could easily enter an unrecognized descending turn that would steepen progressively until the aircraft broke apart from excessive G-forces or impacted the ground. She'd lost friends to similar situations during her military career. Tower control was doing their best, but their instructions were becoming increasingly frantic. November 7-4 Golf Bravo, level your wings and reduce power. Look at your turn coordinator if it's still working. Can you tell us your approximate altitude? I don't know. The altimeter is bouncing around, and everything looks the same out here. My wife is crying, and the kids are asking if we're going to crash. I don't know what to tell them. The human drama of the situation hit Sarah like a physical blow. A family in mortal danger, children who might not see another day, a pilot overwhelmed by circumstances beyond his training. She thought about her own family, parents who died while she was deployed overseas, relationships she'd sacrificed for her military career. This family deserved better than to become another aviation accident statistic. Jake Thompson was standing near the radio now, his face grim. He's losing it, Jake said quietly to Maria Santos. When pilots start talking about their families instead of flying the airplane, that's usually when bad things happen. Tower control is doing everything they can, but they can't fly the plane for him. Maria nodded, her own experience evident in her expression. I've been in electrical failures before, but never this bad. The poor guy needs someone who really understands instrument flying to talk him through this step by step. Dr. Emily Chun approached the group, her medical training apparently kicking in. Is there anything we can do to help? I mean, I know I can't fly, but maybe someone here has experience with emergencies? Sarah felt all eyes turned toward her, though they were looking for comfort rather than expertise. In their minds, she was just a coffee shop lady, someone who might offer emotional support, but certainly not technical assistance. The irony was almost overwhelming. The radio crackled with another transmission, this one from a different aircraft. Riverside Tower, this is Air National Guard 271. We've been monitoring the emergency frequency and are requesting permission to assist. We have an experienced instructor pilot on board who might be able to provide guidance. Hope flickered in Sarah's chest. Military pilots were trained for exactly these situations, with experience in emergency procedures and the communication skills needed to talk civilian pilots through crises. But the response from Tower Control dashed that hope immediately. Air National Guard 271, we appreciate the offer, but you're currently 40 miles out and won't be in position to help for another 15 minutes. The emergency aircraft reports low fuel and may not have that much time. Sarah closed her eyes, processing the tactical situation with the same analytical precision she'd once applied to combat missions. The distressed pilot was approximately 20 miles northeast of the airport, flying in clouds with no navigation equipment. He was experiencing spatial disorientation and approaching panic. His fuel situation was unknown, but potentially critical. Help from qualified personnel was too far away to be useful. The mathematical reality was stark. Without immediate intervention by someone with the right knowledge and experience, this family was going to die. Tower, I'm getting really dizzy, and I think we're losing altitude fast. The ground proximity alarm keeps going off, but I can't see anything through the clouds. What do I do? The urgency in the pilot's voice made Sarah's decision for her. She walked quickly to the airport operations office, where she knew they had a more powerful radio that could reach the distressed aircraft directly. Jake Thompson and Maria Santos followed, along with several other pilots who'd gathered to listen to the emergency. Sarah knocked on the operations office door, which was opened by Tom Bradley, the airport manager. Tom was a former airline pilot who understood the gravity of the situation unfolding in his airspace. Tom, I need to use a radio to talk to that emergency aircraft, Sarah said, her voice carrying an authority that none of them had heard before. Tom looked confused. Sarah, I appreciate your concern, but Tower Control has qualified people handling this. We can't have unauthorized people on the emergency frequency. Tom, there are children on that airplane who are going to die if someone doesn't help that pilot right now. The Air National Guard is too far away, and Tower Control can't provide the kind of detailed guidance he needs. I can. Something in Sarah's tone made Tom pause. Jake Thompson stepped forward, skeptical. Sarah, no offense, but this is way beyond anything a civilian can help with. This guy needs an experienced pilot, preferably someone with military or airline training. Sarah looked at Jake directly, her gray eyes holding a steadiness that he'd never noticed before. Jake, I'm going to tell you something that's going to surprise you. I'm Colonel Sarah Martinez, United States Air Force, retired. I've got 24 years of flying experience, including 3 combat tours and 5 years as an instructor at the Air Force Weapons School. I've talked pilots through emergencies that would terrify most civilian aviators, and I've survived electrical failures in weather that makes today's conditions look like a sunny afternoon. The silence that followed her words was profound. Jake's mouth fell open. Maria Santos stared in disbelief, and Tom Bradley's expression shifted from confusion to something approaching awe. Dr. Emily Chun broke the silence first. You mean all this time, when I was worried about crosswind landings, I was talking to someone who used to fly fighter jets? Sarah nodded grimly. Emily, we can discuss my career later. Right now, there's a pilot out there who needs help that I can't provide. Tom, I need access to that radio, and I need it now. Tom handed her the microphone without another word. Sarah took a deep breath, calling on decades of training and experience as she prepared to reveal herself to save a family she'd never met. The quiet life she'd built was about to end, but for lives hung in the balance. For Sarah Martinez, that was no choice at all. She keyed the microphone, her voice taking on the crisp, professional tone that had once commanded fighter squadrons. November 74 Golf Bravo. This is a qualified instructor pilot at Riverside Municipal Airport. I'm here to help you get your family safely on the ground. Are you ready to copy detailed instructions? The pilot's response came immediately, relief evident in his voice. Yes. Please help us. I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but we're in serious trouble up here. Sarah's training took over completely, her voice becoming calm and authoritative. November 74 Golf Bravo. I need you to listen carefully to my voice and do exactly what I tell you. First, I want you to take 3 deep breaths and tell your passengers that help has arrived. You got to get them safely on the ground. Okay, I'm breathing. My name is David Chun, and I have my wife and 2 kids with me. We were flying back from visiting my parents. Sarah felt a connection to Dr. Emily Chun, who was watching with amazement from across the room. David, my name is Colonel Martinez. I'm a retired Air Force pilot with thousands of hours of experience. I've talked many pilots through situations just like this one. You're going to be fine, but I need you to follow my instructions precisely. Jake Thompson and Maria Santos stood transfixed as they watched Sarah transform before their eyes. The quiet cafe worker had become a command pilot, her entire demeanor radiating competence and authority. She was calling upon skills that had been dormant, but not forgotten, muscle memory of crisis management developed over decades of flying. David, I need you to tell me exactly what instruments are still working. Don't look outside the aircraft. Look only at your instrument panel and tell me what you can see. The compass seems to be working, and I think the turn coordinator is still okay. The attitude indicator is spinning, and the altimeter keeps jumping around. The airspeed indicator looks normal. Sarah processed this information quickly. With a working compass and turn coordinator, she could talk him through basic instrument flying techniques. The key would be controlling his spatial disorientation while guiding him toward the airport using dead reckoning navigation. Excellent, David. Those instruments are going to save your life. Now I want you to center the ball in the turn coordinator and keep the wings level. Tell me when you've done that. The operations office had filled with people as word spread that the cafe worker was actually a retired Air Force colonel talking a family through an emergency. Tower Control had coordinated with Sarah, allowing her to provide detailed flight instruction while they handled traffic control and emergency services coordination. Wings are level, Colonel. The ball is centered. I feel less dizzy now. Perfect. You're doing great, David. Now I need you to maintain exactly 90 knots airspeed. Don't chase the indicator, just make small adjustments. Flying instruments is like performing surgery, all small, precise movements. Dr. Emily Chun whispered to Jake Thompson. She's using medical analogies because she knows David is stressed. She's managing his psychological state while flying the airplane. Sarah continued her instructions, walking David through each step of instrument flying with the patience of a master instructor. She had him establish a shallow descent to get below the cloud layer, using techniques she'd learned during her Air Force career and refined through years of teaching other pilots. David, I want to turn to a heading of 240 degrees. That's going to bring you toward the airport. Turn very slowly, using the compass to guide you. Tell me when you're established on that heading. Turning to 240. Colonel, I can't thank you enough. My kids have stopped crying, and my wife says she feels better knowing you're helping us. The emotional weight of the situation wasn't lost on anyone in the operations office. Sarah was not just demonstrating technical expertise, but showing the leadership and communication skills that had made her successful as a military aviator. She was managing the crisis on multiple levels simultaneously. David, you should be getting close to breaking out of the clouds. When you do, you'll see the airport directly in front of you. The runway is oriented north-south, and you'll be approaching from the northeast. Minutes passed that felt like hours. Sarah continued providing guidance, coaching David through the mental challenges of instrument flying while calculating their position based on time, speed, and heading. It was old-school navigation at its finest, the kind of flying skills that predated GPS and modern avionics. Colonel Martinez, I can see the ground. There's the airport, right where you said it would be. A cheer went up in the operations office. Sarah allowed herself a small smile, but remained focused on the task. Outstanding, David. Now comes the easy part. You're going to make a normal approach and landing. The runway is clear, and emergency vehicles are standing by as a precaution. The landing was textbook perfect, with David following Sarah's guidance for approach speed, flap settings, and touchdown technique. As the Cherokee rolled out on the runway and taxied to the terminal, emergency crews escorted the aircraft to ensure everyone was safe. Sarah set down the microphone and found herself surrounded by amazed colleagues. Jake Thompson was shaking his head in disbelief. Colonel Martinez, I can't believe you've been here for 8 years and never said anything about your background. Tom Bradley stepped forward, his expression mixing gratitude with curiosity. Colonel, what you did today was incredible. But I have to ask, why were you working in the cafe when you have this kind of experience? Sarah looked around at the faces of people who had known her as a simple cafe worker for years. Dr. Emily Chun spoke first. You helped save that family because of who you really are. But you've been helping me with crosswind landings advice for months without me knowing I was talking to a fighter pilot. Maria Santos added, all those times you listened to us complain about flying problems, you could have helped, but you stayed quiet. What? Sarah considered her answer carefully. When I retired from the Air Force, I had a hard time adjusting to civilian life. The aviation industry wasn't very welcoming to female military pilots back then. I took this job temporarily and discovered something unexpected. I found peace in being invisible, in serving others without them expecting anything from me except coffee and a smile. She paused, looking out at the runway where David Chun was embracing his family beside their rescued aircraft. But today reminded me that sometimes peace comes with a price. I had knowledge that could help people, and I kept it hidden for my own comfort. That family almost died because I was more concerned with protecting my anonymity than using my skills to help others. Jake Thompson extended his hand. Colonel, I don't know what your plans are, but this airport could use someone with your experience. We've got flight training programs, aircraft maintenance operations, and dozens of pilots who could benefit from your knowledge. Dr. Emily Chun smiled broadly. And I'd like to request a new flight instructor if you're interested. Someone who can actually explain crosswind landing techniques from personal experience. Sarah shook Jake's hand, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. I think I'd like that. It's time for Colonel Martinez to come out of retirement. Tom Bradley grinned. Well, Colonel, it looks like the cafe position just became part-time. We got a lot of pilots around here who are going to want to learn from a legend. As the day ended, Sarah walked to her car with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Her secret was out, but instead of the judgment or dismissal she'd feared, she'd found acceptance and respect. The rescue of David Chun and his family had reminded her that expertise unused was expertise wasted. The quiet life she'd built had served its purpose, giving her time to heal and find her place in the civilian world. But the emergency had shown her that her true place was in aviation, sharing the knowledge and skills that had taken decades to develop. As she drove home, Sarah Martinez began planning her return to the sky, no longer hiding from her past, but embracing it as the foundation for her future.